The radical changes Alexander the Great brought to this world have inspired countless works, cementing his legacy in history and literature. In 334 BC, Alexander, the king of Macedonia, embarked on one of the most remarkable military campaigns in history, targeting the superpower of that time, the Persian Empire. At just 20 years old, his brilliant and fearless leadership secured victory after victory. Over an extraordinary 10-year campaign that extended to the edge of the known world, he established one of the largest empires ever recorded. Few individuals have had such a profound impact on the course of history. To the Persians, he was known as Alexander the Accursed, but in the West, he was immortalized as Alexander the Great. Early life. Alexander the Great was born on July 20th, 356 BC, in the Pella region of the ancient Greek kingdom of Macedonia. He was the son of King Philip II of Macedon and Queen Olympia, the daughter of King Neoptolemus. Raised in the royal court of Pella alongside his sister, the young Alexander, with his dark eyes and curly hair, rarely saw his father. King Philip was often away, engaged in military campaigns and entangled in extramarital affairs. While Olympia was a powerful role model, Alexander grew to resent his father's absence and infidelity, shaping his path toward greatness.
To understand the relationship between Philip and Alexander, it is important to take into account that although Philip was married to 7 women, he only had 2 sons from these marriages. And his second son, Philip Arrhidaeus, didn't live up to his expectations. He might have had physical impairment. Sometimes he's even characterized as moronic. Hence, Alexander was the only son that Philip could present to the world.
Alexander's comprehensive education was balanced with rigorous physical training. However, in 336 BC, a conspiracy led to the murder of his father. At just 20 years old, Alexander, already displaying military maturity, knew he had to act quickly to secure his succession to the throne. First, he seized the palace of Aegae and declared himself king. With the backing of Antipater, one of his father's most senior generals, Alexander received oaths of allegiance from the nobility and the army representatives. He solidified his rule by avenging his father's death, eliminating his rivals, and punishing those responsible for the assassination, thereby securing his position and setting the stage for his future conquests. King Philip was set to marry a Macedonian woman called Cleopatra, which posed a significant threat to Alexander's claim to the throne. Any child from this union would be a full-blooded Macedonian, outranking Alexander, who was half Greek. Olympia, fiercely protective of her son, likely whispered words of doubt into Alexander's ear, questioning Philip's intentions and whether this marriage was an attempt to undermine their positions. At the wedding, Alexander's fears were confirmed. During the celebration, Cleopatra's father, Attalus, proposed a toast, urging the guests to pray for a true Macedonian heir. Enraged, Alexander hurled his cup at Attalus, striking him in the head, and shouted, "What am I, then, a bastard?" King Philip, enraged by the confrontation, rose from his chair, drew his sword, and lunged at Alexander. However, in his drunken state, he collapsed over a table before reaching him. Following this dramatic incident, Alexander and his mother chose to self-exile. Despite the tensions, Philip had no intention of disowning his son. He eventually spoke with Alexander, convincing him that his fears were unfounded. Alexander returned to Macedonia with his father, but the seeds of doubt planted by his mother's whispers lingered in his mind. What happened next would become one of the most consequential moments in recorded history. Alexander's reign. In 334 BCE, the 20-year-old Alexander III of Macedon declared war on the Persian Empire, embarking on one of the greatest military operations in history. At that time, the Persian Empire was the largest the world had ever seen, stretching from India to the border of Alexander's territories in Greece. Established over 200 years earlier by Cyrus the Great, it reached its zenith under Xerxes I. Darius III had just begun his reign in Persia a few months before Alexander. Despite repeated warnings from Greek spies to avoid engaging Alexander's elite infantry, Darius underestimated the threat and ordered his son-in-law Mithridates to lead 14,000 men to confront Alexander head-on. This confrontation resulted in a decisive defeat for Mithridates, showcasing Alexander's tactical brilliance and solidifying his reputation as a formidable military leader. Later, when the Persian army first encountered Alexander at the crossing of the river Granicus in what we now know as Turkey, it became clear that Alexander was heavily outnumbered. His 18,000 soldiers faced a formidable Persian force of 40,000. Yet, the odds meant nothing to Alexander, who was ready to demonstrate his strategic genius. Understanding the value of every soldier in his diverse army, Alexander led the charge against the Persians in the first major battle of his campaign. With fearless determination, he clashed with the enemy cavalry, exhibiting unparalleled bravery. During the chaos of battle, Alexander nearly lost his life. His daring charge left him surrounded by Persian nobles, and one delivered a near-fatal blow to his head. Though his helmet absorbed most of the impact, it shattered, leaving Alexander concussed and vulnerable. As Alexander reeled from the blow, another Persian warrior, sword in hand, charged at him from behind. Unaware of the imminent danger, Alexander faced certain death. But at the same moment, the sword was intercepted and cut off by Cleitus the Black, one of Alexander's trusted generals. Cleitus's quick intervention saved Alexander's life. Despite this close call, Alexander's battle plan had worked flawlessly. His strategic acumen and the unwavering loyalty of his men ensured a decisive victory at the river Granicus. This triumph not only solidified his reputation as a brilliant commander, but also marked the beginning of his legendary conquest of the Persian Empire. The Macedonian Empire. Within a year, Alexander decisively defeated Darius III at the Battle of Gaugamela, marking the end of the Persian army, marking the end of the Persian Empire, and seizing control of its vast territories. Upon entering the legendary city of Babylon, Alexander was captivated by its splendor, the mythical hanging gardens, streets adorned with flowers and silver, and throngs of people eager to catch a glimpse of their new conqueror. In just 6 years, Alexander had dismantled the Persian Empire. By the age of 25, he had become the pharaoh of Egypt and the newly crowned king of kings, making him the most powerful man on earth. Despite his conquests, Alexander yearned for the acceptance and love of the Persian people. However, his excessive drinking often led to violent fits of anger. During a visit to Persepolis, in a drunken rage, he ordered the city to be pillaged and burned in revenge for the Persian burning of Athens 150 years earlier. The fire destroyed centuries of art and culture. Once sober, Alexander deeply regretted his actions and left the city, not returning for years. Though defeated, Darius III had escaped the Battle of Gaugamela, prompting Alexander to become obsessed with finding him. Unfortunately, before Alexander could capture him, Darius was betrayed and killed by one of his own generals. When Alexander found Darius's body, he was moved by respect for his fallen adversary and ordered him to be buried with the honors of a king. Despite originally being his prisoners, Alexander had grown extremely close to Darius's wife, mother, and children, treating them with great respect and care. Did Roxanne really steal the heart of the great king? You must be curious about Alexander's love life, so let me walk you through it. When Alexander attacked the kingdom of Sogdiana, King Oxyartes of Bactria prepared for the worst. He sent his wife and daughters to seek refuge in the impregnable fortress known as the Sogdian Rock, which had been provisioned for a long siege. Scaling its formidable walls seemed nearly impossible. Undeterred, Alexander called for volunteers to climb the cliffs guarding the fortress. 300 men, enticed by promises of rewards, bravely took up the challenge. Against all odds, they succeeded in reaching the summit. Witnessing this remarkable feat, Alexander demanded the surrender of the fortress. Shocked and demoralized by the audacious advance of Alexander's troops, the defenders realized defeat was inevitable and capitulated. It was during this victorious moment that Alexander caught sight of Roxana, Oxyarte's daughter, and instantly fell in love. The ancient author Arian of Nicomedia vividly recounts the siege of the Sogdian rock fortress and the initial meeting between Alexander and Princess Roxana. He describes Roxana's unparalleled beauty, considering her the most beautiful woman in the world. But the question lingers, did Roxana love Alexander? Initially, their relationship was politically motivated, but Alexander's genuine affection for her eventually led to her reciprocating his love. What did Alexander's generals think of this union? All of Alexander's generals and many of his friends opposed the match, believing it offered little strategic benefit. Before Roxana, Alexander married Stateira II, daughter of the deposed King Darius III, in his efforts to gain acceptance among the conquered Persians. It's widely believed that Roxana, fearing for her unborn child's future rights to the throne, had Alexander's previous wives killed. When she gave birth to a son, she named him Alexander IV. Rebels. Alexander began to adopt Persian customs and attire, a change that stirred resentment among his fellow Macedonians. They understood his intent to win over the Persian people, but when he started demanding that everyone, including his officers, kiss his hand and bow to him, many felt he had gone too far. In Greek culture, such gestures were reserved strictly for the gods, and some officers took deep offense to this. This cultural clash led to plots against Alexander's life, a threat he soon became aware of. It had only been 6 years since his father was assassinated by one of his own men, and now Alexander faced similar dangers. The memory of his father's assassination was fresh in Alexander's mind when one of his most trusted commanders, Philotas, admitted knowledge of a plot against him but kept it concealed. In response, Alexander ordered the execution of Philotas and his father Parmenion, deepening his descent into paranoia and further alienating himself from his men. Alexander began to rely more on Persian advisors, replacing older Macedonian ones, as he pressed his army deeper into Asia. He pursued King Darius's killer while battling local tribes, relentlessly crushing anyone who opposed them. By 328 BCE, they reached the edge of the Persian Empire, where Alexander, in his customary fashion, founded a city named Alexandria Eschante, meaning furthest Alexandria. During a night of revelry with close friends, a drunken Alexander boasted that his conquests surpassed even those of his father, Philip II. Cletus the Black, who had fought alongside Philip, vehemently disagreed, seeing Alexander's words as deeply disrespectful to his father's legacy. A heated argument erupted, culminating in Alexander impulsively hurling a spear through Cletus's chest, killing him instantly. This act of violence deeply troubled Alexander, especially since Cletus had once saved his life during the first battle against the Persians. His relentless military career led him to the Battle of Hydaspes, where he defeated another king but suffered his heaviest losses yet, amidst rumors of a vast enemy force with elephants and millions of soldiers waiting in India. After 8 years of continuous conquests and arduous marches, Alexander's exhausted army refused to continue further. They demanded to return home, and despite his frustration, Alexander relented. The journey back took 2 long years. Shortly after their return, Alexander faced a devastating loss. Hephaestion, his lifelong friend and possible lover, died suddenly at the age of 32. Overwhelmed with grief, Alexander abstained from eating and drinking for days, shaved his head, and ordered the death of Hephaestion's attending physician. In his grief-stricken state, he even demanded the destruction of temples. From that moment on, Alexander never fully recovered from the loss of Hephaestion. How did Alexander die? Exhausted from their long march back home, Alexander and his army sought refuge in Babylon, where they planned to celebrate their victories with their usual fervor for revelry and heavy drinking. During this time, Alexander excused himself early from the festivities, feeling unwell. The next day, despite his feverish condition, he engaged in a drinking contest, but abruptly left when he felt a sudden stabbing pain in his back. His health rapidly deteriorated over the following days, to the point where he could no longer speak. In a dramatic passing of authority, Alexander handed his signet ring to Perdiccas, his senior general. On June 11th, just shy of his 33rd birthday, Alexander succumbed to his illness and died. His death left a vacuum of power, and there was no clear plan for the succession of his vast empire. When asked about the future of his kingdom, Alexander famously replied, "To the strongest." Although his wife Roxana would later give birth to a son, he would never ascend to rule. Strangely, Alexander's body showed no signs of decomposition until his burial, leading his officers to believe he was divine. Modern historians, however, continue to debate and theorize about the circumstances of his death, including the unsettling suggestion that he may have been poisoned or even mistakenly embalmed alive. Many mysteries surrounding Alexander the Great's death remain unresolved to this day.